But prior to that, I worked in the UK, and I worked with the English Sports Council, and particularly worked with youth athletes and talent identification. So my area of expertise is basically how children grow and how that growth influences selection into various sports. And that's what I'm going to present to you today. And this is, I'm not sure if any of you get this, but this is UEFA's Direct magazine. This is November's issue, so it's just come out. And you can see what it's saying there is bigger shouldn't mean better. And that's really what I'm going to discuss with you tonight, is the whole distribution of how people grow. So I think we're all very well aware of these types of situations where we have two individuals of exactly the same age playing against each other. And in something like football, obviously, you know, size really does matter. And there's a major concern about perhaps the unfairness of this, but also things like injury, increase in injury, etc. So that's why this has become a sort of major concern. And it's not just football. So here's a couple of examples in soccer. One is from the girls are both 14 years of age, and the boys are both 10 years of age. So you can see that the match-up is likely to have an important effect on the performance. So I come back to my first slide, and of course I'm trying to identify, so who is, if this is working, so who is this young individual here? And of course it's not going to be too difficult to obviously identify that in fact that's myself. Back in my day, when I was an early maturer, so I was big for my age, the major problem wasn't so much the size, but as you can see, the equipment that we used in the 1960s. And you can imagine when that leather ball gets fairly, maybe some of you here also used to play with these types of balls. And of course, when it makes me laugh now when people have problems with kids heading, which are basically light feathers, to what was a solid leather ball that would soak, and which was held together with a ribbon or laces, and once those laces got wet, it got pretty heavy. So as I say, that's me, and this is me now still playing in the Saskatoon League. So what I really want to talk about is the difference between chronological age and maturational age, and how that influences what you can see when you look at people of the same age, seeing their different sizes, and basically emphasizing why that occurs. So a better way of describing this is probably years from birth, or years from maturity. So when we talk about chronological age, we know when you're born, we know how old you are when you come in and you're playing and you're chosen for a soccer team. In terms of years from maturity, what we mean there is basically everyone matures into an adult, everyone starts at this pre-pubertal kid, but the timing of when you go from that pre-pubertal kid to a full adult status can be up to 5 years. You can see it's an up to 5 years difference within the same chronological age band. So really this talk is focusing on a very small window of probably 5 years, from about 10 years of age until 15 years of age. And I say a small window. The important thing to remember is that boys and girls mature at different ages. So girls mature earlier, probably 2 years earlier, and so their band might be slightly different. This is not a new subject. This is data that from a guy called Tanner, who basically looked at the 1960s track and field athletes, and what he basically found was when he looked at these athletes that he concluded they were both born and made. And so what that says is there's that inheritability. We always tell that really bad joke that if you want to be a top athlete, you've got to choose your parents carefully. But that is very true, that you're inheriting so much, whether it's their aerobic fitness, whether it's their tall size to be a striker or even taller to be a goalkeeper. But once you have inherited that information, you do have to train it. So, as I said, I worked for the Sports Council in the UK, and their motto back in the 1990s was sport for all. There was a paper that came out in the British Medical Journal in 1983 which actually changed that title to Sport for Tall. And what really that said was, and it was based on data that was collected in the Montreal 76 games, and what they found was that amongst the tall, it was the tallest participants who won the medals. So even though you had a sport where tall was advantageous, the tallest of the tall were the medalists. And I think really what the conclusion here was, or as this guy summarized it, was that it's indeed surprising that so many people enjoy sporting activities when they're of a small stature. If we take it to Canadian sports, obviously hockey is the big one. And of course we know that at the senior level in hockey, physical dominance is going to play an important role. But what we have to go back and look at is when you've got two kids, so here we have 12-year-old boys, both ice hockey players, both of the same age. There's considerable difference, up to 5 years in maturation between the two. So obviously, if we're saying that physical dominance in the professional leagues is what makes a good player, then we have to look at it, what's happening at the youth level. So let's take the example of Wayne Gretzky. So Wayne Gretzky is, I was going to say was, but he still is, 6 foot tall. When he was playing, the average height for a hockey player was 6 foot 1 inches. What I have over here is what's called a growth chart. The middle line is the 50th centile, so that's the average height, and this is basically from age 8 up to 16, 17. So that you can see there's quite a large variability in the expected height at any given age. But when I look at Wayne Gretzky's height, he's what's called in the 90th centile. And what that says is that only 10% of the population are taller than him. He's taller than 90%. So if we're seeing sport that's basically favouring the tall, big question comes, what happened to Wayne when he was a child? You know, was he an early developer, etc.? The other question that's really important is something called the relative age effect. And this is basically saying, so when you think about your age grouping, you likely group by 12-month age groupings. And so let's say your cutoff is January 1st. The individual born in January, in terms of growth, can have 12 months more growth than somebody who's born in December, who's on the same team. And this data has been looked at in professional sport. So this is the NHL between 1998 and 1989, where if you had a normal distribution, this is the first 3 months of the year, second 3 months, etc., you'd expect people to be born relatively equal. But what you can see is in this professional sport here in hockey, that the vast majority of players are actually born within the first 6 months, 4 to 6 months of the selection year. And this is some data taken from the same time, but this time looking at bantam players. So at bantam you're roughly 14 years of age, these are males. And what you can see is the pattern is already present at that age. So that shows you that the selection is likely to be fairly close. So if you select someone at the bantam age group, the likelihood is they're the ones who are going to end up, if you're selecting the oldest for their year, it increases the chances that them ending up in the professional game. So I talked about years from birth, years from maturity, now I'm talking about months from the selection cutoff. So all of this presentation is about age and how you interpret it. So just to illustrate the fact, what's happened, this is some data from Saskatchewan. So working with the Saskatchewan Mining Hockey Association in 2005, we went round the bantam team selections. So roughly 600 kids. So if we look at their birth selection of those 600 kids, you can see that really there's no pattern there. So everybody could be born at any time. After the initial selection, they then reduced the numbers. They reduced the numbers finally to a second group. By the time you get to the second group, we're talking about 80 kids. You can see that within those 80 kids who were chosen as a provincial team, we're now seeing this pattern that was shown in the professional ones that I showed you. And then this is the 40, I think it was 20 kids who actually made the side. You can see even more so. And I haven't shown you the height data here, but what was also found was there was an equal distribution of stature initial tryout, but by the time you got down here to those who were selected for the team, they were the heaviest, they were the tallest. I'm now showing you they were the oldest in terms of that 12-month selection, and also they were the most mature. This is some data of selection. This is the 2016 European Under-17s, 2016 Under-19s. And again, January to March, the majority of those players, you can see what I'm showing you is the selection of sorts has already taken place. This is some data that, as I said, I worked in the UK with a variety of sports. We're looking at here, we have soccer, so this is 1 to 3 months is in red, blue is 4 to 6 months, green is 7 to 9 months, and the purple is 11 to 12 months. If we start off, let's take gymnastics for example, you can see that that effect wasn't in gymnastics, but in tennis and in soccer, there is a great advantage, and these are individuals aged between 12 and 15 years of age. You know, we were given these individuals, we worked with the top coaches, a number of these were actually all associated with English Premier League teams. So this is really what I'm trying to talk about, is ultimately how, you know, this is basketball where obviously tall stature makes a big difference. I'm trying to see how size and how obviously it's going to affect performance. I've talked about being tall, I've talked about being born early. I also work for the World Gymnastics Federation, and of course they're interested in the opposite. So sports for small, if you grow too big, then you get cut from the sport. So it works both ways. Okay, so really for you to understand, or I'm going to help you understand how we got to this point. So when you're working with a child, I like to talk about growth as a journey and talk about it in terms of a train journey. Here we have an individual who's been measured since birth up until 18 years of age. And what you can see is that it's not a linear journey. So that means that you don't grow the same amount each month or even each year. In the early years, you have quite rapid growth up until about 2 years of age. Between 2 years of age and 10 years of age, you roughly grow about 4 to 5 centimeters a year, shown by this sort of more linear line. Then we get this dramatic increase in the speed of growth as you enter puberty, and in girls that's from 12 to 14 years of age, and in boys it's from 10 to 16 years of age. So that's our journey. So what we're interested in, if we think of it in terms of a train, the problem is that you may see them here at 10 years of age. Your problem is you've no idea where they've come from. You also have no idea where they're going to. So that's the problem when you get a group of children. What you want to try and understand is that journey. Just to give you some examples of milestones in terms of height in that journey. Basically, you're about 3 centimeters at 8 weeks. At birth, roughly 50 centimeters. At birth, you're 30% of your final adult stature. by 2 years of age in boys and by 18 months in girls, you're 50% of your final adult stature. So if you do work with kids and you do have some of this data, and a lot of parents do have data regarding health, when they have immunizations around 2 years of age, quite often you get your height and weight measured. That's a very simple thing you can do if you're asking yourself, how tall is this person eventually going to be? You know, you just have to, say, double that height, and that might give you an indication of whether they should stay in being a goalkeeper or midfield or striker, etc. At peak height velocity, so this is when you see that most rapid growth, an individual is 92% of their final adult stature. Here's a picture, again, illustrating the point that these are all 10-year-old boys, and you've seen this all yourselves. We have a small individual who's less mature. He can also be small just because his parents are small as well. And then we have the individual here who could be more mature, etc. These are under 10 rugby players, so again, size has a big impact on performance, and the biggest concern is that these individuals will be chosen for the team, but these individuals at the end unlikely to be chosen, but probably have or possibly have the most talent. Just to give you an indication of what happens within a normal grouping, and this is just to explain those centile charts that I was showing you, all that's happened here is all these individuals have been sized by their height. And so what you can basically see is, as you can see, 50% of the population are below a certain height, 50% are above. So take that data and put it on a normal curve. So here's my 90%, the tallest, here's my 3%, the shortest, and here in the middle is my 50%. And what this line here, dot, represents one individual, where they're measured on multiple occasions. One of the things that's interesting in growth, I told you first and foremost, at 2 years of age, you're 50% of your adult stature. Once you get past 2 years of age, and you get on a centile, it's called a centile line, if you are at the 50th centile by 5 or 6 years of age, you're going to end up on the 50th centile when you finish growing. So growth is very much in a pattern of growth. So here we can see following this thing. The unfortunate thing is very few people follow this average line, and some people start increasing the tempo of their growth. So that's what we're really seeing here, is that we've got two 14-year-olds, one does gymnastics, one does swimming, but what you're actually seeing is that the taller girl starts on the 50th centile, ends up on the 50th centile, but when you're working with them at 14 years of age, they suddenly started growing quicker. Okay? So again, as coaches working out in the field, you really have no idea of where someone is in terms of their growth aspect. And the opposite is also true. So these are the two extremes. So this girl starts at the 50th centile, ends up at the 50th centile, but during those 14, 12, 13 years of age, she's actually growing at a slower rate. But as I said, the important thing is it's not where you're at now, it's where you're going to end up. Because for all of us involved in youth sport, we eventually want everyone to be playing senior sport. We want to have them a pattern of sport behaviour for life. So obviously, we don't want to just concentrate all our efforts on someone who's just naturally growing earlier. And I'm going to illustrate this with my own daughter. So this is Jessica here, and she's 10 and a half years of age, and her friend Hayley on the right hand side is 11.2 years of age when this photo was taken. And so obviously when I'm illustrating, I look at Jessica's growth, she was actually bang on average. So she was an average growth, whereas Hayley was following a pattern of slower growth. So later timing and slower growth tempo. So there are two interacting things that are happening right now. And I just wanted to show you, here is a picture of them at grade, this is their grade 12 grad. So you can see that Haley did end up being shorter, but not by the same amount that was seen when they were 10, 11 years of age. This is a diagram that's just illustrating the average growth of boys and girls. So up until about 5 to 7 years of age, girls are always slightly taller. Between 8 and 10 years of age, you get this sudden growth spurt. So that by 11 to 15 years of age, girls on average are going to be taller than their male counterparts. But then the male's growth spurt occurs between about 15 to 16, and you can see that they catch up and eventually overtake their females. Again, growth is patternal, and I want to tell you that you can actually look at this much earlier on. So I'm illustrating this with my two boys. So Lachlan, who was born in 1997, is in the blue. Dougal, who was born in 1999, is in the red. And so you can see, even from at birth, this is birth up to 14 weeks, in terms of weight and length, Lachlan was below the average line, whereas Dougal was above the average line. If I now move on, and this is now taken in 2009, so now they are 10 and 13 years respectively. Again, red is Dougal, this one here, the blue here is Lachlan. So you can now see they're on, which seem to be on the same centile. And if we do it for weight, however, you can see that whereas blue Lachlan's on the 50th centile, the red, which is Dougal, is on the closer to the 90th centile. If we now move forward 3 years to 2011, measuring them again, you can now see that at 14 years of age, Dougal's height is similar to the height that Lachlan was 2 years earlier. But Lachlan's growth has been less, so the difference has decreased with increasing time. And so has the mass. And what's quite interesting is that so here's their parents, myself and my wife Jan, and you can actually target where they should end up. So in theory, they should, well, presuming that my wife has been faithful and these are both my kids, the idea is that they should end up at exactly the same point. But the target is within about 9 or 10 centimeters. So again, you can work with parents to predict where a child is going to end up, and then when you're working with them, you can work backwards and say, okay, they're 90% of what their target height is going to be based on their parents, therefore I can actually say, they've gone through their pubertal growth spurts. Okay, so I'm telling you that size is meaningful. This is just to illustrate that size isn't everything. So we've been doing these longitudinal studies in Saskatchewan this is since the 1960s. So what we have is 3 boys, all age 7, A, B and C. Roughly 7 years of age, and all roughly the same height, about boy A here and the boy C at the end are both 130 centimetres. The boy in the middle is 120 centimetres. So these are now the same individuals. If we move forward, we can now see that boy A is 173 centimetres and the boy C is also 173 centimetres, and this boy here 156. So he's still about 20 centimetres shorter. So that's 14 years of age. These are the same individuals now who we measured at 40 years of age. What you can quite clearly see now is that the boy here at this end is 180, the boy here, or man as say is 180, the guy at the far end is 195. So it's really important to go back in time to when 14 years of age. So what it's really saying is this individual, he's virtually mature. He's only got 6 centimetres of growth to go. And we said at the same time, we could have said that these two are the same maturity based on the fact that they're the same size, but in fact, this guy still has 21 centimetres of growth to go. as does this guy. So these two are probably more related to maturity. So that's just an illustration of why you can't just use size alone. This is a picture just to illustrate the familial resemblance. So this is actually a gymnast. She's actually 5 foot, no, I think she's 4'12". But what you can see quite clearly is that both her parents are small as well, and she has a sibling who's in the same group. And then going back to the tempo, so what's happening here then, to illustrate what's happening here, is that we've got one individual who's obviously on top of the line against another individual who's on the bottom of the line. Because these are obviously the two extremes you're going to see in your group. So I told you about the journey, we don't know where anybody is. Although we don't know where anybody is, what we can do is look at the velocity, how fast that journey is going. And this is called, so this is the velocity, so your greatest velocity, as I said, is up to about 2 years of age. You then grow about 4 or 5 centimeters a year to about 13. And then between 13 and 16 years of age, you have this peak. And at your peak, you're growing at about 9 centimeters a year. And this is what's called your peak height velocity. So here is peak height velocity for boys and girls. So girls, you peak at 12, boys at 14. But the other thing to note is there are differences in the sexes in how they grow, in that the magnitude of growth between boys and girls, they're maximing out about 10 centimeters a year, as opposed to boys who are about 12 centimeters a year. And the other important thing is that girls finish growing at about 15, whereas boys are still growing at 17, 18 years of age. And this really explains the difference between the average height of boys and girls, which is roughly about 13 centimeters. It's related to this maximum growth and the fact that boys keep growing. So although girls have this maximum growth, boys are still growing 5 centimeters. So there's about 10 centimeters difference in growth between the two, plus another 2 or 3 centimeters related to the velocity. That's how you end up with the average difference in boys and girls. So going back to my daughter and her friend then, what's happening is, in terms of velocity of growth, my daughter here, she grew early, she grew faster, but she finished growing earlier. Whereas Hayley here, she didn't start growing until later. She still grew at a steady pace, but ultimately she didn't grow as much in those later years. What's important to remember, and some people keep saying this, is that early maturers end up being taller, or late maturers shorter. That's not true at all. That's one of those sort of urban myths. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're early or late, because the body, there's a compensation mechanism. So I'm just going to finish off now then, just to talk about, if you could measure that peak height velocity, how useful it would be. One of the important things to remember is that you grow in proportion. So I told you at 2 years of age, you're roughly half your adult height. When you're born, your head is half its adult size, your arms are a quarter of their length, your legs are a fifth of their length, your trunk's a third of your length. And this is important because as you grow, the other thing that's important to note about growth is that your hands and feet grow first, then your legs, and then your trunk. So all of you with kids will know that the kids, first of all, they grow out of their shoes. When they start growing out of their shoes, that's telling you there's a growth spurt going on. Then they grow out of their pants, and finally they grow out of their shirts, and then the whole thing starts all over again. So just remember, and the data I've been showing you in the black and white slides is actually data from 1760. So the first growth study that was recorded. The point was to illustrate that kids today still grow exactly the same, but they may just grow a bit earlier, may grow a bit faster. So what we did was that here's our peak height velocities. We keep talking about boys, roughly over 13 years, girls in blue. What we also did was we looked, and this dotted line here is basically the their leg length. The solid line here is their what's called their sitting height. So they're basically their trunk length. So when you measure someone standing up, and then if you measure them sitting down, then if you took those two measurements away from each other, their trunk from their total height, you could calculate their leg length. And again, there's a pattern that's occurring here. Legs grow first, then the trunk. And these are both associated with the middle of peak height velocity. So that's exactly what we did. And this is a tool that's online on our university website, is that if we know the gender of someone, their date of birth, their date of test, their height, and their sitting height, this program will actually calculate their age at peak height velocity. And so we could say that one individual has a chronological age of 11.2, but when we measured them, we could predict that they were having a peak height velocity of 12.2. So we'd be able to say they're about a year away from reaching that peak. And then we could have somebody else who's exactly the same chronological age, but their predicted age is 11, which means they've got maturity. And so this is something that, as I say, we developed. And I showed you right at the beginning that FIFA magazine. Well, this is taken directly from that FIFA magazine. It says how to measure biological maturity, and this is our work here. So they're actually quoting the work that I'm showing you here and spreading the good news around the world, I suppose. So again, it comes back to this UEFA document. Bigger shouldn't mean better. They're very concerned that youth teams are being mismatched. The actual article talks about how to remedy the relative age effect. I have to disagree after showing you all of this. This article has actually confused the idea of maturation and birth date effect. So what I've shown you is that maturation is over that 5 years, but the relative age effect is basically growth within 1 year. So but they can be added on to each other. So if you're an individual who's growing early and born in the start of the selection year, you kind of have a double whammy. And this final thing to show what the article's been talking about is that back in September 2015, the English Premier League actually used this way to what's called, this is where the bio-banding comes from. So they used this technique, they predicted people's maturity, and then they aligned their sports accordingly. So that's it.